And we're live. Hey, we are going to go a little solo right this second right now. And yeah, we got a few people on standby, and we will bring them in just a second. And actually, I have a special guest today. Woo-hoo. Special guest. Let's go right on down the thing. We got Buff, we got Terrence, we got Twisted Mopar, Garage, we got One Eye Cat, Auto Salvage, Slant Daily Garage, you let that guy in here. Mr. John Wilburn, master of the No Name Nationals and the bringer of fun. One Eye Cat and Colleen. Oh, we've got our special guest here. Now, there's not a lot of you on here, but it's a familiar face. And I hear him. I hear him knocking. I hear him knocking. And who do we have here?
Hey.
Who do we have here?
The special guest.
It's Mr. Dallas Brown. He's in the house.
Yeah, I wasn't planning on doing one of these anytime soon.
Well, it's good to have you back, man.
Yeah, I felt like answering some tech questions.
Yeah, you know what? I'm telling you, it's always good when you can talk cars with your buddies. That's the way I always say it.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, we'll see. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah. So, now I do have a few things that today at 8 o'clock with the Hardcore Tech, we're going to be talking about hydraulics and how oil pressure plays into a part on your lifter pressure and how it doesn't. I've been getting a lot of emails on when you preload it all the way to the bottom. They're talking about, well, doesn't that take away spring pressure? And I'm like, well, no. I'm running 75 pounds of oil pressure. I'm like, well, yes, but that's on pounds per square inch. So we'll get into that later on at 8 o'clock. We'll talk about the formula, how you can calculate it, and then how you can calculate it with the force with your rocker arm ratio to what spring pressure is. Really simple deal. It's really easy.
Yeah. That's the Hardcore Tech tonight?
That's going to be the Hardcore Tech tonight because here's the thing, is that, believe it or not, I've been getting a lot of questions about hydraulic lifters lately as far as how to set them, why do I set them 20 thousandths from the bottom, and why is it that when you put it all the way to the bottom, they have a tendency to hang open the valve. And I'm like, well, it doesn't. It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't matter if it's 20 thousandths here or 20 thousandths from the bottom as far as the adjustment. It just means that if the valve train ever goes out of control, if it's 20 thousandths from the bottom, you have less likely of the push rod popping out than because you have 100 thousandths of play in the hydraulic lifter. So if you're 20 thousandths of preload only, you have 100 thousandths for that thing to pop out, and it can actually come out if it ever goes out of control. Like say you miss a shift or something happens, you can pop push rods right out.
Huh.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I see it in the chat here. One Eye Cat says I'm looking good. I've lost 40 pounds. 40 pounds. Yeah. What? If you want to go on a crash diet, just divorce your significant other, and this is what happens. This is the result.
Yeah. Well, and you're walking. It's not just that. It's walking.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. And I did the same thing. I started exercising and eating correctly, and I did 35 pounds. I wasn't quite 40, but I did 35 pounds. So,
yeah, I'm there.
Yeah, I went from 225 to 190. So
I'm at 182. I haven't weighed this light since I was 24 years old.
Wow, man.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could get down under 190 though, because I'm already at a 34-inch waist. So
yeah, I'm right there with you because I went from a 38 to 34. My belt does not have another
loop.
The loop that it doesn't have another hole for, and I have to get a smaller belt now.
Yeah, I actually stopped wearing them. I had to buy new shorts, so 34-inch shorts, and then I can wear them without a belt now. So I'm good. Yeah. Yeah, right?
Danny Boyd says he needs to lose 40 pounds, and he only weighs 8 pounds less than me. Well, I'm 6'2", and I don't know if I can get much thinner without dying. So
you're 6'2", really?
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. I'm just a shade over 6 foot. So
yeah, Buff is saying I'll fit in my Navy uniform again. And in reality, I will fit my Navy uniform from when I was like a E2.
Right?
Yeah, that's a lot of weight.
Yeah, and now we're on the end of our 40s here, so yeah. I feel good about it. You know, I'm feeling the best shape I've ever been.
I'm not feeling good.
Well,
But
as far as
I am feeling better, to be honest with you, and it was a lot of the folks in here, encouraged me, to keep on going. This sucks, but you'll deal with it. And things are getting better every day for me. So I don't want to go on a rambling diatribe about, life talk, but I think we should just do some tech talk.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
Once it comes in here, we don't see much coming in, which mostly. But I can tell you that I did get my wife's bike ready to go for this weekend, and I put on a little bit of ape hangers for her. So it's
Sweet.
She doesn't know that yet. She might find that out now on the Tech Talk here. But I got rid of her beach cruiser bars, and I got her bars like mine, but not so crazy. But that way we can cruise in style, in Southern California style. So
I was pressure washing my driveway, which had been neglected for probably 3-4 years now.
Yeah.
And I was just trying to keep myself preoccupied instead of thinking about all the crap that's going on. That's the only way to really get past all this is you gotta find some time somewhere, and then you just fill your head with something that it doesn't eat you up.
Yeah,
right.
That's the whole thing. Yeah, just find something that you enjoy, and when I was kind of doing my thing, this is what saved it. So this is why I keep doing this, because it helps out.
And you told me that, like, oh, dude, I love doing the lives. It helped out a lot every Wednesday. Like, I like doing the lives too, to be honest with you. I just am, I'm burned out on everything at the moment, and I just need to take a break. The last thing I need is more time taken away from me and my family right now. So. Yeah.
Well, I haven't made a video in a while, and I'm okay with that.
I have not made a video. I looked at this the other day. It says you haven't posted a video in 6 months and like 12 days. Like, gosh, has it really been that long?
I couldn't even tell you when the last one.
When do I get demonetized? That's what I'm shooting for. The day before demonetization, I'll put up a video.
Right? Get some watch hours back again and be like, okay, I'm good.
Yeah.
I don't even know. But I do know that I got a 4-day weekend coming up, and so I'm going to get some stuff done. I'm going to get a carburetor back on the old Slant 6, and I'm going to start driving that thing again, because I miss driving it.
You're just not happy with the EFI?
No, and here's why: is because it's so sensitive, and what I mean by that is that it's with the carburetor I can get better mileage tuned correctly. With the carburetor, I can actually make it run faster. Now with the EFI, it just does everything. It does everything like the 2-barrel does.
It's startup. That's all you're getting. Is startup is nicer.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's all I'm getting is just startup, and it does make that easier. But once again, I start it up and I just let it sit there and idle for a little bit, and then I drive down the street, and then the carburetor runs just fine.
Yeah, once it's up to temp, it's like it doesn't really matter.
And on a Slant 6, it really needs that intake manifold temperature. That's really what you're looking for, because that's the only way you're going to get that fuel distribution a little better. Otherwise, it's just puddling fuel in that intake runner. And I think that's the reason why I'm having so much issues with the fuel injection with the throttle body. Now, when I get an injection right at the valve, that might be a whole different deal.
I bet it will be.
All right, we got a first question up here.
Actually, you got one above that.
Oh,
Colleen asked one.
Oh, perfect.
What's the optimal length of tubing needed on open headers for a 318? You will never know.
Yeah, 18 inches is a great place to start. So right where the collector's at, start. Well, you know what? Start at 24 and then shorten it up. But usually 18 inches is about the number.
There's a trick to this.
Yes, a paint trick. Yes.
Well, not necessarily paint, but get yourself a crayon, right? And you mark down the entire length of the collector plus the extension that you have on there, and where the crayon starts to burn or stops burning and stays on the pipe, that's where you cut it. That's the optimal length, because it's different for each individual engine with a different camshaft combination, with a different carburetor, and in a different application. Because see, a C body header might be completely different than an A body header, right? And it has everything to do with ideal tuning and length, and where the tubes go, and how they're routed based around the steering and all that stuff. So get yourself a crayon, mark it down, and where it stops melting at, that's where you cut her off.
Yeah, most small block Mopars are going to have a 42-inch length tube off the head to the collector. That's just because of how much stuff it's got to pipe around. Based on that, usually 18 inches, as far as, like I say, a 3-inch pipe hooked onto that is about the number you're going to want. But I wouldn't run just true open headers because you're actually going to lose power. You're going to lose some of the scavenging effect. So put on a collector at least 18 inches. That's where I would start personally.
If you wanted to get like technical about the whole thing, technical.
Yes, you can really get technical on this.
You throw an X pipe in there, right, and then make sure it is before what's the ideal length for your header, right, or for your collector, and you'll get some serious scavenging from the other side. Actually, the car will be quieter than open headers because it has something to do with that X pipe, where they just cancel out each other's tones. But yeah, it's that's the ideal thing right there, is throw an X pipe in that sucker.
Yeah. All right, moving on. What do we got? Question: Procom Victor Jr. Speed Pro Big Block Mopar headers. Big Block Mopar. Seen a set that had been opened up and ported, went through several areas. No water leak. Can you leave them?
Be
no vacuum leak. Yeah. I mean, I maybe I'm not really understanding the question. So Big Block Mopar seen a set that had been opened up. Oh, he opened them up. Okay, by hand porting, went through several areas. No water leaks. Can you leave them? Be no vacuum leak. Yes, as long as when you put the gasket on there, as long as the gasket's not being opened up, like he didn't open up beyond the gasket, and then when you put the intake manifold on, that it's the same angle. So you can actually put it on there and then put the intake on, especially on the Big Block Mopar, because it's not like it hits the what's it, the tray at all. It basically just hits the head, and then you can just look down in there and see if it's correct or not. It's same angle on both sides.
If it has no water leak, I'm assuming you're probably not going to have a vacuum leak at all.
Yeah, and on a Big Block Mopar, there should be no water on the intake at all. Anyways, that's the whole beauty of a Big Block Mopar. There's basically 8 bolts, and you take the intake off and you put the new intake back on. So I think what he's talking about is water leaking to the head itself.
If they didn't get in the jackets, you're okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. With the carburetor, I can probably see exactly what's wrong if there's a problem. Yes, I agree. And that's... Yeah.
Oh, I was going to throw some interesting story out there at you.
Sure.
Okay, about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, Animal Jim Foyer ran my T-Bird for the first GT Class exhibition race. Mm-hmm. And you know Animal Jim? Have you heard of him?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Animal Jim was telling me, because I had Cleveland-headed Windsor, and he thought that was an interesting idea because they were running Cleveland-headed Clevelands back in the day. That was the ticket, right? And he had some big cubic inch Cleveland that Jack Roush had built. It's like 440 cubic inch or something. And he said that the heads had been ported so much on the Clevelands, they couldn't run water in the engine. So they would literally have radiator, water pump, all the hoses, everything for tech for it to go along for the ride, but it never had any water in it, right? And that because they would leak. You would definitely have water leaks into the cylinder. And he's like, it'd slow down 0.2, and you just ran it without water, and just make one pass and shut it off, right? So what do they know? But I always thought that was super interesting that they went so far that they actually had water leaks into the intake runner, and they were still racing them. So
wow. Last week I had a question, and I did some research on this one, and Wannabe actually is going to ask this one again. He was asking me why didn't people, instead of nitrous, why don't they just run pure oxygen? And I knew the answer to it, but I just wanted to make sure that I had it correct. Now, here's one of the things. First off, pure oxygen would be hugely volatile. Plus,
I was just going to say that.
It's huge. Like I was saying, it's hugely volatile. But I did touch on one thing that I knew that the answer was, but I wanted to make sure. N2O you can actually put into a liquid form, and then it expands into gas, like I was saying last week. With the pure oxygen, you can't do that. And that's what makes it, that's why you can have almost, 100 times the amount of fuel with N2O than you can with oxygen. Plus, the amount of how volatile and how dangerous it's going to be. With the N2O, basically under pressure is where it separates with the nitrogen, and that makes it inert. But and then you get the expansion rate of it going from a liquid to a gas.
That's the magic behind nitrous,
exactly.
is the cylinder pressure.
Exactly,
right?
And that's where you're going to get the cylinder pressure. Not just pumping in pure oxygen, you're also getting the cylinder pressure and the cooling effect. Now, oxygen under pressure will do the same thing, but you're going to get a lot less fuel, plus of how explosive it will be.
And that's the big thing is,
yes.
See, oxygen, even if you're putting it in, it's hard to get liquid oxygen, okay?
Yes.
If let's just say, for instance, you had liquid oxygen and you could run it in there. Liquid oxygen is what they use in the space shuttle and spacecraft, right? Mm-hmm. And you watch them blow up and you wonder why they blowed up. Why. It's because they're using liquid oxygen that literally is volatile gas, right? Nitrous oxide, when you add the nitrogen to it, it bonds to the oxygen molecules. And what it does is it makes it virtually inert. It's a very stable gas, mm-hmm. right? And then under heat, it'll release the oxygen molecules, and you get to burn from the oxygen, and then you only have the expellation of extra nitrogen, right?
Yes, and that's what stabilizes it. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So yes, I did want to be looking to that, and I just want to make sure that I was clear. I was going to answer that last week, but I wanted to be 100% sure. And a lot of it has to do with it can be in a liquid state that's relatively available, where it's hard to get liquid oxygen.
Well, Bicycle Guy 111 has another good question directly under that one.
Right here?
Okay, yeah. Can I get your opinion on running the smaller journal 245 cranks in a 400 small block Chevy crank or block with a 265 journal? I hear it's either run spacers or regular bearing or really thick spacer bearings. They do make spacers, and then you put a regular bearing in it.
Yep, that's what I do on the Mopars.
Right, and there's other applications that are the same way. I've been looking at doing it for 300 Buicks with a 215 crank in it and make them 274 cubes. But the smaller the journal diameter, the lower the bearing speed, right?
Yep.
You got to think of it like a 10-speed bicycle, okay? As you're riding a 10-speed bicycle up on top of those big, tall tires, at the very top of the tire, it's really freaking flying. But if you look down at the spindle, that sucker's barely moving.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's the same thing that happens when you look at small journal cranks. They actually have less friction, less reciprocating mass. There's a lot of benefit to small journal cranks, with the exception of, okay, what makes a crankshaft work well is what they call overlap from the main journal to the rod journal. You generally want to have some kind of overlap. Otherwise, there's so much leverage on it, it breaks the crank. Mm-hmm. And that's why Chevrolets went to a larger journal from the, let's say, the early 327s and 283. They went to a larger journal when they went to the 350, was because of the added stroke moved the rod journal away from the center of the crank. Mm-hmm. So they made a larger diameter crank. Right.
Same with the 360s. That's what they did on 360s, so that way you have more overlap to make it stronger and made it less flimsy.
Right.
And that's why a lot of the guys, when I would take a 360 crank block, you put the spacers in it, you put a 318 crank in it, and then you basically can make yourself a 340.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And there was someone did say something. Yes, I said pure oxygen. I meant to say liquid oxygen. But once again, this is a live thing here, so sometimes you just misspeak. So
yes, they do have spacers. It's not a spacer bearing, I don't believe anymore.
No,
is it?
It's a spacer and a bearing.
Okay, you're just running a standard bearing with a regular spacer.
That is right. Yeah, that is correct. Exactly. And then someone said here that it says that thanks, but oxygen will not burn on its own, needs fuel. Yes, but anything becomes a fuel at that point. Even the aluminum will become a fuel at that point. Anything will become a fuel.
So on the SpaceX, when they were trying to figure out what to do for fuel, because it was what you're limited by when you're looking at spacecraft is weight, right? Mm-hmm. So they were looking at what could they possibly use for fuel that wasn't so heavy. And if you're using liquid oxygen, just like Shane said, anything becomes a fuel at that point. Because think about it, like you take a torch. A torch has oxygen and acetylene, and it takes a regular acetylene and turns it into super acetylene, right? Mm-hmm. in this case on SpaceX, what they did was they used a solid chunk of rubber, because the rubber actually weighed less than liquid fuel. And they get the rubber up to temp. Well, actually, they would use liquid fuel to get the rubber up to temp. And then once it got to temperature, the oxygen would start atomizing the rubber. And the rubber would just burn like mad, and it would essentially last all the way up into space.
And if you didn't have your mixture right, your cylinder head would become the fuel. It would basically start taking some of that aluminum, blowing it off, and then it would just be suspended in the air, and that oxygen would just allow it to burn, and then you would just have a Roman candle. So, and then the top of the piston would be part of the fuel. Anything would be fuel at that point, and then it would get hot enough, and it would just create a chain reaction. It would just keep on going. So, I think I did miss one up here, a little back here, and right here. Someone was asking about, Shane, did you see the Master of Machines with Glenn Evett with the 225 with Weber's, etc.? Yes, I did. I did see that one. That was the one, it was in Australia, I believe. It was a Slant 6. And they did some really trick stuff, but 282 horsepower, 5,700. But as much work as they put into that thing to make that little power, at that point, I would just basically use a stock head, make 210 horsepower, and then put a little squeeze to it or a little turbo to it, and make it. That way, you wouldn't have just a dedicated race car, because that thing was just basically a dedicated engine.
Race engine, race engine only.
You could drive that thing anywhere then at that point. So yes.
Well, Buff is asking a question. He says, "Why does the 351 Windsor have such large mains?"
Oh, yeah, there it goes.
I can only speculate, and I think it's because of the added stroke. They beefed up the mains to make it stronger.
What was the diameter on that?
They're 3-inch
3
mains
inches?
on the Windsor, yeah.
I think they were designed for trucks, though, weren't they? And they were designed.
It was not meant to be a performance engine, but what happened was the Windsor has such a better oiling system than the Cleveland. And the Cleveland has, if you don't look at the oiling system, has every other benefit in the entire engine over the Windsor. Okay, but when you start spinning main bearings and rod bearings all the time because of lack of oil, the trick used to be just to put those Cleveland heads on the Windsor block and just live with the larger mains. Larger mains generally mean that it's going to be stronger. If you think of it, the crank adds rigidity to the block. So the larger the mains, the more rigidity the block will have, and the less tendency to flex, right? That was the big ticket with the 455 Buick. They did the big 3¼ inch mains and allowed the crank to provide rigidity to the block, and the block was really flimsy. Now the 351 Windsor, in this case, I really love the 302. The 302 is one of my favorite all-time engines. It's got a comparable bore and stroke. The rod to stroke ratio is good. The main size is small, so you don't need a ton of oil. You just
compact.
Need it. Right. It's a very versatile engine. Front sump or rear sump, it doesn't matter. And I think what they did is they just took the success of the 302 and kind of threw that at a little bit larger cubic inch engine. I really think that's all that happened there. Because if you look, even the later 351 Windsors with the roller cam, the block still gives up around 600 horse. I mean, they're not very strong. But those larger mains really do help out when it comes to longevity. Generally, what you find is that the bigger mains, they'll last a lot longer than the small main engines, but they don't like to rev. They don't like all that RPM.
Yeah, and also too with the bigger journals too, you're going to have a lot more oil that's needed on that bearing itself, and plus you're going to have the wedge is going to have to be that much bigger because there's so much more oil across the area.
Right, and you got to remember it's losing a lot more oil because of the surface area too.
Yeah, that's right, going out through the side. Exactly.
Right.
Colleen, we had an old lady here in my area who would walk around and sit down, smoke a cigarette, hack her lungs up, and then puff oxygen from her tanks on wheels. Surprised she wasn't a fireball.
Yeah, that stuff. You know, they actually have a firefighting apparatus in the Navy called, oh man, I can't remember what the hell that thing's called. Well, it doesn't matter. It was like a hood that you put over your face, right? You just put the whole thing on it. It had an oxygen generator at the top. And they would tell you, hey, if you have to put one of those on, don't smoke for 15 minutes, right? Because you will go up like a freaking human Roman candle.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. All right, yeah. Anyone ever deal with the D-stroked 400? Yes, I have. I have an old 383 here, which came in a 69 Camaro, which I've had since the early 90s. Previous owner had all the paperwork, receipts from the period. Yes. When I was actually, there was a time there in the mid 90s, I was in Georgia, my first time in college, and I built my very first 383 D-stroked 400. Then that's where we put a 350 crank in a 400.
That's a 377.
Sorry, 377.
That was my favorite engine that they ever did. That was a circle track killer.
And that's exactly what we built it for, because it was a big bore, massive bore, short stroke. And then we were able to put a rod in that thing. We put the pin up near the ring, and man, that thing just RPM to the moon. And we had no problems with that.
That was the ticket, was the D-stroked 400 using a 350 crank and 6-inch long Oldsmobile rods.
Yeah.
And then you would have something that would zing. Man, would that sucker zing.
Yeah.
But they sound so different than any other small block Chevrolet because of that big bore.
Yeah, it has that deep bass, boom, boom, boom to it. Yeah. And people looking at us, I remember when first time we went onto the track, because I believe it was the biggest you could have was like I think it was 370 cubic inches, and this thing came out, like you said, it was 377. In fact, I think the first one we did was 30 under. I can do the math real quick, but
well, the funny thing is about those was the circle track guys were doing this. They were leaving it standard bore, right? If you leave it at standard bore, it comes out to 372, right? And when you P&G a motor, it's hard to tell 1 or 2 cubic inches. It's really hard to tell.
Yep.
Because it doesn't come out. A P&G doesn't come out with an exact number. It's got a variance on it that's actually more than what you think. And so what they started doing shortly after the P&G pumping the motors was they'd pull the head and measure the bore, right?
That's
so
what
the
they did.
ticket used to be sleeve the number 1 cylinder, right? Just the number 1. And you'd sleeve it like 20 thousandths under. And you'd have a special piston made for it, and the rest of them would be standard bore 400, and you could not tell by looking at it because the sleeve was so thin. It's only like, like you're looking at 20 thousandths difference. And if you have a good machine shop, they can easily make it look like it never had a sleeve.
Or if you just hide it as an O-ringed block, because you at the time you're allowed to run an O-ring block. Yeah, so then you hide it as an O-ring block, even though it's not really an O-ring. It's like that. But yeah, that's actually what they did. Is they would find 400s that were 4125. I think is the stock bore on one of those, right?
4125.
Yeah, so 4125 with the 350 comes out right. Like you said, I just did the math. It was a 372. So yes, that's what the number was, and I remember doing that. And man, it sounded awesome.
I remember that when I was a kid, my dad would run stock eliminator, and it was like all the Buick guys hung around together. There's only like 4, right? All of NHRA, there was like 4 guys. One of them was named Lynn Smith, and Lynn Smith had a 71 GS Stage 1, and it was a factory air conditioning car. And he'd leave the air conditioning pump and everything on it, all the hoses and everything. And when he'd do teardown, the driver's side of the motor would be standard bore. On the passenger side of the motor, it'd be 80 over.
Oh, right? Wow.
And that was 20 thousandths over farther than you were supposed to go per NHRA rules. And he left the air compressor on the engine so they didn't want to take it off, because if you ever seen a Buick with the AC system on it, it is a freaking mess. It's got brackets on top of brackets holding brackets with bolts in brackets, right? And
more brackets.
Yeah, they did not want to screw with that passenger side, so they just left it off. And then it was I want to say, actually, I think the max was like 60 over on him, and he had 60 over pistons in the driver's side and 80 over on the passenger side. And that's where, it'd come out to like 475 cubes, which is... But you had to have every trick that you could possibly find back in those days. It's just like it is now. There's nothing stock about a stock eliminator. Don't let them fool you.
No.
Yeah. Factory cast block is about the only thing you're looking at.
Yeah, and basically is how good can I cheat and get away with it is what that means. Yeah, exactly.
Just like the ticket used to be like, run the Honda 520 oil.
Yeah.
The motor's only good for 5 passes or 10 passes, but that's all you need for a weekend.
That's all you need, man. Yeah, that's right. And there was we're talking before about ATF in the the rear end. I've done that too, and that's only good for a little while, also. Because you'll destroy those gears. Dust Devil says, I think that's why the 340 is so good. Also, the 400 big bore short stroke. 100% correct. The 400 was one of those engines that got no love. If it would have got a little bit more love, there would probably be a lot more people running these blocks than they are 440s, because it's a short deck, big bore, short stroke.
383. Awesome. Big bore 383.
Yes, basically. You're exactly right. And man, I love that 400. People would just walk over those things at the wrecking yards, but that's the one I loved. Once I rebuilt my first 440, and then I had a 400, I looked at it and I had the pistons out and I had them next to each other. And the piston was way up here and the pin here, and the 400 was much closer. And I'm like, what? And the decks were different. And then I realized that you could get a
sat so far in the hole.
Yeah, and that you could get a 383 steel crank for nothing, right? Because nobody wanted them. So I could get these 400 blocks cheap because nobody wanted them. I can get these cranks for nothing, internally balanced, and then I could run the rods
from a 383.
From the 383, which is a better rod, and then I would just cut down the weight of the piston, and all of a sudden I had a race engine with just factory parts, because once again, I was broke and I was poor and I was trying to go fast.
That's like the stuff I always like to do. I like to think my way around the problem. That's why I like to stick with the Buicks, because nobody makes anything for them.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something cool about 400 Buick. Okay, it was made from 67 to 69. It's virtually a big block Buick, same as a 455. The 455, though, like every big block Buick is the same deck height, the same stroke, the same rods. It's just the bore size is different. So the 400 Buick has a 4040 bore, just like a 340 Mopar, right? But if you're looking at swapping pistons and stuff like that, 4040 is the perfect bore, because the Chevrolet small block has it, the big block, or the small block Dodge has it. It's like
everything.
There's so many pistons available that all you got to do is find a rod to fit, right?
Yeah,
and it's
make
like
a custom rod.
Yeah, exactly. So I love the 400 Buick just because of that. And the neat thing is, they got the 455 Buick came with such a big bore. It's 4.312, I think.
Wow, that's a big one. Yes.
Yeah, and the 400 with its smaller bore, when you throw a stroker crank at a 455, it comes out to 528 cubes, because it's got a ginormous bore, right?
Yeah.
But if you throw that same crank at the 400 Buick, now you got something with a 4040 bore and 4.1/8 inch stroke or 4.5 inch stroke, when they came with a 3.9 inch stroke. And now you don't have something super big cubic inch, but golly, it's just like the 455. It would have tons of torque, but now you got a stroker crank with shorter rods, and I mean, it's going to be really torquey.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's what I was just explaining with the 400. That's the reason why I went from big blocks to small blocks when I was running a street racing, is because to run the engine I wanted, I had to find this block. I had to find a 400. I had to find a different crank. I had to do this and do this to get the combination that fit in my A body.
Yeah.
But then when I went to the small blocks, I could just go find any 360, just put another 50 kit of nitrous to it, and I was back to even. In fact, because I took so much weight off the car, it wasn't I needed 100 horsepower. I only needed 50 more horsepower to equal the same amount as the big block.
Right.
So
weight is a big difference, especially when you're talking like the engine right on the nose.
On the nose, and especially on a Mopar, because on a Chevrolet, the engine sits back from the center line of the wheel. On a Mopar, man, that thing hangs way out there out in front.
Plus, you got that completely different suspension with torsion bars that generally weigh twice as much as a coil spring.
Everything,
right? They do ride nicer, but they just, man, the weight for them, you pay a penalty.
It's the Mopar tax, man. I'm telling you, it's the Mopar tax. Not only do you pay for it in monetary, but you pay for it in weight.
Well, that was neat about when I swapped a big block Buick into that Suburban, was the 455 weighed 25 pounds more than a small block Chevrolet, right? I mean, you're talking big block versus small block, 25 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you're looking at, like, let's say a 1970 LS6 Chevelle, okay? They ran the number back in the day, probably 13 flat, something like that. If you had a stage 1 Buick compared to that thing, it would automatically weigh 200 pounds less off the nose, right? Just because the big block was so flimsy and so light.
Yeah. All right, let's go on. Mopar Man 1978 took the D150 out for a drive the other day on our 30-mile road trip. No more noise from the front of the transmission area. We'll test drive a 65 highway to see if noise came from back. Okay, well, good. Awesome. Well, I'm glad it's working out. Bitchin'. Mr. Ron English. Come on. Oh, come on, show. These are the stories us novice gearheads love to listen to all that we can. Well, that's good because, when you're poor and you're trying to drag race and you're trying to street race to make a little bit of cash and you're kind of in that intermediate. I've always been never the fastest guy or the slowest guy. I've always been kind of in this middle range because that's all I could really do, financially afford. You have to make it work, and then the guy with the bigger check comes out and he beats you by, a car length and you're like, damn, man, I got to figure out what can I do to go faster? How can I put more juice in this thing or whatever?
Oh, my big one was always the ones with the 5/64 rings. You pull them rings off, and they Total Seal makes a spacer. Yeah. And you go get the 43 thousandths rings, and throw them on the piston with the big, huge gaps, and you fill it in with the spacer, and now you got something that's cheap off the shelf, and it runs like scalded dog. The problem is, them suckers will break the rings because it's got the spacer in there plus the ring, right? So when they bind, it's a lot of flex on that ring.
Yeah. And I did my very first small ring on an LA engine, and this is the one that's going in the Is that me?
No, that's me. That's here.
Oh, okay.
That's somebody's opening my garage door. I'm assuming it's my kids.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Well, I have a wash machine back here, and I was going to make sure it didn't start up on its own. I did really small rings on the LA. This is my very first run on these, and I got to tell you, I did a pull test on that, like with a fishing, and man, it only took like a pound and a half to move that ring pack through there.
I'll tell you, the neatest one I ever did was the Jack the Giant Killer 300 Buick for this guy in Florida. And I had put those super thin rings with the lightweight pistons and the long rods in it from Molnar. And I put the ratchet on the end of the crank. And I'm like, oh, well, I need to go I went to get something to measure something, right? I think I was actually checking the depth of the piston in the bore. And I just walked away, and the weight of the ratchet turned the motor over.
Yeah, with all 8 pistons in it?
Yes, all 8.
Yeah. Mine took less than, I think it was 100 inch-pounds, and I put it on there, and the brake free was like 100 inch-pounds, but then to keep it turning was like 70, and I'm like, dude, that's nothing. That is literally, this is no weight at all.
When you go race tolerances, thin rings, it makes a huge difference, and I'm talking all that stuff adds up. You might get 5-10 horsepower here, 5-10 horsepower there, and 20 horsepower here. But when it's all said and done, you're looking at, man, all that stuff added up to another 100 horse. And
this was not only the crank, but all 8 pistons, all 8 rods, the Mylodon idler gear, the camshaft, and all the lifters were in it, and it still took that much breakaway.
I'll tell you, when it's going to be a big difference is when you put the piston, like I used to use the sleeves for the piston installer. Like they're such a pain in the ass, and I'd always come out with like mangled hands, like bleeding all over the place, right?
Yep. I know you're going with this.
But I got those sleeves that are tapered to fit the bore, right?
I got the same thing.
And when you drop your first piston with the thin rings in there and the coatings on it, and you put it in, you set it in where you're going to get it like lined up with the block. And you push on it with your finger, and it's like, pew, falls right in.
Finger.
Yes.
One finger.
You're like, exactly, oh, wow.
Before you got like that piston knock.
Hammer, yeah.
I went and grabbed that thing, and I set that in there, and I tapped it to square it up, and then I was just like, well, let me just see. And I literally put one finger on it, and I was like, oh, man, are you kidding me? And
that's right in.
Yeah, it fell right in. Mopar 1978 says, Shane, I saw the converter issue with the help of John Cope. Had sent both converters.
You just did this one, didn't you?
Did I?
I think so.
Oh, anyways, well, we'll do it one more time. Well, he was just telling me that they solved the converter problems with his Valiant. This is the one where someone gave him a 65 Valiant and a different engine with a different converter, and I was telling him that the snout's going to be different. One's going to have a big snout, one's going to have a small, wouldn't go in there. You could change this or you could change that. So what he's going to do is he's going to have his converter cut and then have it built together. So, yeah.
Huh.
Well, that's good. Well, awesome.
Colleen's saying smash that like button, folks. Smash that thumbs up like button. We do need it. We don't have any budget around here.
We don't have any money that I make from this. I'm just going to throw right back in the No Name Nationals anyway. So if you want to donate to the cause, I think I might have. You know what? I just became I hit my 4,000 hours and I did all that paperwork.
Oh,
so
you got monetized.
I think I got monetized.
I'm looking at getting demonetized. That's what I'm trying to do right now because I'm not making any content. I haven't, and I'll tell you what it is. It's like my life sucks right now. I don't plan on making any content. Sorry, folks. I'm just trying to get my head out of my ass and my life back in order, and I'm not going to make any content until that happens. That's priority is me right now.
That's right.
Sorry.
Work on you. That's right. Because there's nothing without you. So let's just make it work on you. All right.
Well, today my start stand and 2 engine stands left my garage.
Oh.
And I'm trying to make room in my garage so I can turn some stuff out and get things out. That's really the plan. And FYI, there will be some content coming up. It will be on my T-Bird. I'm pulling it out of freaking... I was thinking about calling it a barn find, but I just left it there and I knew it's there. And but
the refind of your car?
the refind of it. And I'm just going to pull it out of the garage. We're going to air up the tire. I'm going to probably put 4 new tires on it, get the thing running, and just get it for sale.
Are you going to make a pass in it? You got to make at least one pass in it.
Dude, I'll probably just do a burnout in front of my house with it or something cool. I mean, dude, that was the coolest thing. When I first got that thing running, and I don't know if I ever told you this. I built that entire car in a storage unit in Jacksonville, Florida. It had one outlet in it to charge a camper. And it only had like a, 15 amp limit or 10 amp limit on it. And I mean, I'm in there with a soldering iron trying to solder all these wires together, and it can't even get hot enough because it's tripping the breaker. And I built that whole car in a storage unit in Jacksonville, Florida while I was stationed there for 5 years. It took me 8 years to build the thing. And when I first fired it up and got it on the ground, it sounded so damn healthy, right? That's the first time I'd ever had all motor making 650 horse or so. And I backed it out of that storage unit and I took it around the storage lot, and all I did was goose it, and this thing just blew the tires off of it. And I thought, this is what I needed from the beginning, right? Like, this is it.
Yeah, right?
There is no replacement for real, honest to God, all motor horsepower. There is no replacement. I don't care how badass your nitrous system is. It is nothing like an NA car. Nothing.
I agree. And that's the first time that I had mine. We were in Poway, and I got some decent heads, 360-1 heads in it, and I had a 408, and it was the first time I made over like 600 horse from something that was like naturally aspirated.
Right.
Same type of deal. I started that thing up, I backed it out, and I'm just going around the block, and I got it all nice and warm and everything, and the thing's it's like, just crazy. Yeah. I tapped the throttle, and it literally went, and I was like, oh yeah, wow, that was impressive.
Yeah, my tires didn't make any noise. It just freaking blew up into a plume of smoke.
Yeah, mine like it just made engine noises, and then tires, it didn't even accelerate, just
right. Yep, mine didn't accelerate or nothing, and you could just see the plume.
Yeah.
Like, holy cow.
Yeah, there was no like lean back or anything. It just was instant smoke, and I'm like, wow, like that was something. Goosing
it on nitrous is fun, but nowhere near like NA. Nothing.
No, because it keeps on pulling with the NA. With the nitrous, it's an instant torque hit, and everything, the torque falls off instantly, and then it's just how long can you carry it out. But with the NA, it just keeps making power, and that hit is hard, and it just keeds going. So
yeah, and
that's
plus
why
it's so much easier on the drivetrain. It's so much better to me. Like, it is so much better. I hated nitrous because it was like literally I had to have a dump truck full of car parts behind me because this thing would spit drive shafts out and axles out and all kinds of trannies. It was hard on stuff because all the torque comes like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, pow, right? I mean, it's instant, just like the solenoid. And that's a cool thing, but it's unfortunate when you're talking about your budget, when you're a low buck guy.
Yeah.
Man, I was tearing stuff up left and right.
I was melting. Before we get on that, I was melting. I couldn't afford spark plugs anymore. That was my biggest thing because I kept melting.
Oh, really?
Yeah. What you got?
Tom Brown saying, Dallas, did I ever make it to the Buick Nationals this year? That's funny that you asked that because my life went to absolute shit April the 17th. And if you remember, I was building an engine for a guy that had a 1972 Electra 225. And I was actually going to do a video. I was going to call the Electra 22.5-hour engine swap. I was going to drive it to my house with the rods hammering. We're going to pull the motor out in 22.5 hours, have it back on the road, going back to this guy's house. Well, that dude backed out once I got the motor done, of course, so that I had full value in it. And my buddies, my local Buick group here, I mean, I got to give a shout out to those guys because when my life went to shit, those guys were over here that day, you know, and, you know, pat me on the back, tell me everything was going to be okay. They helped me put that motor all the way together because I did not feel like doing it. I literally felt like falling on a sword. That's what I felt like doing. But we got the motor together 2 nights before the Nationals. I loaded it on my trailer, hauled it up to the Buick Nationals. The first day was threats of rain, so there was very few people. And I left it there overnight. We got there. It was late. I got there about 4 o'clock. Everybody was already packing up and heading home. The next morning, before I even got to the track, which was like about 8:30 in the morning, before I even got to the track, the motor was sold.
Wow.
It sold within 20 minutes of the gates opening.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, it was like cash in hand, ready to go. All I did was fire it up on the engine start stand. And, I mean, just like all the other ones, you give it 1 rack of gas and hit the button, and this sucker was lit up and happy, right? And this dude was happy to get it. He was putting it in a 71 wagon, and it's got a Tremec TKO 5-speed in it.
Wow.
Or, no, it's got, I'm sorry. No, it is a TKO 5-speed, yep.
Yeah, TKO, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Lout? Is that Lout? Am I saying that right?
Lout Burns, yep.
Lout Burns, okay. Wasted 20 minutes a day working on a 1962 327. Couldn't get to run in the idle circuit. 5 inches of ported vacuum. Then realized it had no PCV system solved. I don't know.
When they have no PCV system, they would have more vacuum, I would assume.
Yeah, but on the ported vacuum,
5 inches on the ported vacuum.
Yeah, that means that you should be on full vacuum because the ported vacuum, it would be 5 inches. Oh, I think that's probably what he's trying to say is that he was taking it from the ported vacuum, then he switched it to the PCV
he realized it had
system.
no PCV system.
Yeah.
And so then he put it on full vacuum.
Yeah, then he put on full vacuum. Now I understand what you're saying. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because I actually did that the first time on a Slant 6. I thought it was full vacuum, and it was actually ported. And because there was 2 lines down there, and I was on the wrong one, and it wasn't changing anything. And I was just like, oh yeah, there you go, right?
Yeah, because if he's reading off ported vacuum, there's literally no vacuum going on there until the throttle's open.
Yeah,
because it's above the throttle blades.
Yeah, but if the throttle blades are open just enough, sometimes, because depending on where that port's, like usually right past the transfer slot, you'll get a little bit of air across there, and it will pull a little bit of vacuum on that just because of the air passing by it. And I've actually seen that, but it's very little. 5 inches is it won't trigger anything. So yeah, that's a pretty big vacuum leak. Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, he just wasn't getting any vacuum.
Yeah, it wasn't getting any vacuum. Yeah. Drip tube instead of PVC. Yeah.
Yeah, the downdraft tubes.
Yeah, it's actually PCV, but yeah, close enough. Yeah, drip tube. Yeah, going on with that. Yeah. Dallas, we have no more. I didn't miss any. Good. Okay. Well,
yeah.
We're up to date.
We're caught up.
You're caught up.
That means since you're not asking any tech questions, Shane and I, is it 8 o'clock yet?
It's close enough. We'll talk about it.
Throw some hardcore tech out there.
All right. So here's what we got. This has been kind of the new thing is that I've been seeing this a lot on YouTube and on videos and I've been getting questions quite a bit about this one. So there was a while back when probably a few months ago we were talking about how I do my hydraulic lifters, where I actually compress it all the way to the bottom, then I bring it 20 thousandths off the bottom, so that way it's basically lash. And so if you ever over rev the engine, the valve train ever goes out of control, you're not going to have all that extra hydraulic lifter of 100 thousandths. If you only put 20 thousandths down, you still have 100 thousandths there, where if it goes out of control, it'll pop the lifter out. But then the questions kept coming up. Well, then it's going to pump up oil pressure, and then it's going to, push down on the valve. It's going to hang the valve open. And then I was trying to explain to them about pounds per square inch and how that actually works. And they didn't really understand that. So basically, when you have force, especially on a hydraulic piston, if you're only pushing it one direction, not both directions, that's a whole different deal. But if you're going one direction, it is force equals pressure and then area, right? So when you're dealing with a lifter, a hydraulic lifter, most of those pistons are going to be like 375 thousandths. It's about it. They're different, but let's just, for the sake of argument, call it 375. So then here I made a little math. We got math. So yeah, here is your radius. This is pi. This is your pressure, and this is going to equals your pounds per square inch. And this is actually what is going to be pushing on your push rod. So you take 375, divide that by 2, you square that, times that by pi, and then your 75 pounds of oil pressure. So the only thing that actually is seen on the actual lifter itself is 8.28 pounds per square inch. Then that is actually what's pushing on it. Then they were like, well, what about the rocker arm? Well, if you take 8.28 times that by 1.5, the only thing that you're going to see on that is 12.42 pounds. So you're only going to lose 12.42 pounds of actual spring pressure that is going to be going against the valve. So it doesn't really matter. And if you take this number,
yeah, with a spring that's 100 and something pounds, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's negligible, and then you'll lose more in that just in variation from spring to spring with temperature and cold. You're surprised at how much those things
heat
change.
treating and diameter changes and
heat cycling,
irregularity of the diameter of it, and
then you have spring stacking, because that's a whole different deal too,
right? Or the thickness of the oh man, what's the thing on top? I can't even remember now. Oh my
retainer.
God. Yeah, the thickness of the retainer. If it's 1,000 thicker, you're talking about like 20 more pounds.
It does, yeah, especially on the inner spring. And then you have drag if you have a dampener in there. So there's a whole different thing. So now, if you take that, and then someone goes, well, on startup, I've got 100 pounds of oil pressure instead of 75. Well, at 100 pounds of pressure, we do the exact same math, and you only lose 11 pounds at the actual lifter. So then you take your answer, times it by 1.5 with the standard rocker arm, and that's going to be 16.5 pounds. So that is nothing. That is not going to hang open a spring that's going to have, let's just say, the lightest ones are going to be like 60 pounds for a Slant 6. Most of your small block Chevrolets factory are going to be 90 pounds on the seat, 2 something over the nose. Anything performance is going to be...
Plus you're talking about it, that's the weight of it on the far side of the rocker.
Yeah.
Right? So
exactly.
On the opposite side of the rocker, where it's 1.5, let's say it's a 1.5 ratio. If it was 90 pounds, add another 45 to the other side of that. Right?
Yeah.
So now 135 pounds is what it's taken on the far side, on the near side of the rocker where the push rod's at, to open that 100-pound spring, or that 90-pound spring.
And because the spring now has a mechanical advantage because it's got a longer lever from the fulcrum to the push rod, it actually has less pressure. Does that make sense? Because it's got a longer lever on it. So the spring has more leverage to push this down. So it will technically never really hang it open. I did the math one time, and I'll see if I can do it here really quick, but I had to really do, I think it was 1,000 pounds of oil pressure. Yeah, you would have to have 1,000 pounds of oil pressure to have 110 pounds. And the 110 pounds would just be of lifter pressure, but then you would have to have overcome the mechanical advantage of that, the spring, and the rocker arm. So then you would need to have probably 1,200 psi of oil pressure, and that would put you at about 132 pounds, and then you might start to hang open the valve.
So I'll tell you something interesting where I learned this. I learned this in the sonar world in the Navy, and it's because we have this scuttle. We had this scuttle. All the sonarmen on every ship has this scuttle that goes down into the dome. It opens inward to the dome, okay, our sonar dome. And our sonar dome is pressurized with 36 pounds of water, okay? And what you'd always have is you have this overambitious division officer they're generally an ensign. They've never even seen a ship in their life. This is the first one they ever been on, and they'd want to go in there and inspect it. Okay? And here you are, you're a ship in the water, which you're not allowed to be on any other atmosphere except for 36 pounds of water inside that dome. And this guy would have opened the scuttle hand wheel and unlocked the dogs to where the scuttle would open. And he'd be jumping on this scuttle and smashing this scuttle with a hammer. Oh, this scuttle's so broken. Why can't I get in here? Well, sir, do you realize that's a 36-inch scuttle with 36 pounds per square inch on the other side? You would need like 82,000 pounds of force to open that up. And if you did open it, it's pressurized water at 36 pounds on the other side. So it'd be coming at you like a fire hose, except for it's 36 inches in diameter, right? And it would shoot you off of the ship.
Yeah.
In pieces, right?
Because it would hit you and you'd go poof.
Right. And, I had no idea that's how this worked. Well, if you do that simple math problem like Shane just showed you, it would show that like 82,000 pounds of force to open that. You would need a hydraulic ram to open that thing. And most likely what would happen was the metal would bend before you opened it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that's one of the things and that's one of the main reasons why I do the lifters off the bottom like I do, because that spring will overcome that hydraulic pressure all the time. All that thing is supposed to do, all the hydraulic lifter is just to take up the lash. That's all it's there for. And the way the masters work for a hydraulic, which are different than a solid, is a master for a solid comes off of the advertise very slowly, and it takes up the lash really slowly, so that way it just basically touches it, and once it touches it, it exponentially ramps up faster. Where on a hydraulic, it can open much faster off the seat. So basically the advertised to the duration at 50 is much faster. So that way you can have a much faster ramp in. And that's why a lot of guys that started running those tight lash cams, all those are really technically are hydraulic masters. So you can run like a 6,000th, 8,000th lash on your solid, and all you're doing is just taking up that little bit of lash so that way it doesn't make noise. And that's the
whole purpose of a hydraulic lifter. In reality, is in the automotive community, it's called NVH, noise, vibration, and harshness. Yep. That's the main thing that everybody focuses on eliminating, because when you start that Mercedes, it has to sound like nothing, right? Right, you just got a black hole of sound in your driveway as it's running. Mm-hmm. Now, the hydraulic lifter works on the same principle as a solid lifter. Hydraulic actually, once the engine's running, is no different, because liquid does not compress. Mm-hmm. So once it's filled that lifter, it's just as tight as a solid lifter. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and once it fills up, and then you have a locket, you have a ball in the bottom of it, which is your low pressure, and you have a high pressure chamber outside. And then as it goes through its cycle, when it starts to move up, that ball cycles down to the bottom, and it basically locks that hydraulic fluid that's in there, the oil, and then it goes around its cycle. Then when it comes down and relaxes, that ball comes back up, and then whatever you lost from just spillage as far as leakage, it refills itself from the high pressure to the low pressure chamber, and then as it goes back through its cycle, the ball takes the lash up again, and it goes through its cycle. And that's all it does. That's all the little check ball on the bottom does. And that's all the hydraulic does, lifter, is it just keeps filling with fluid. And that's why when you start running at a high RPM, it has a hard time refilling that chamber. And that's why, especially on the exhaust, your exhaust is going to be the first one that goes out, because you're opening against spring pressure and cylinder pressure on a hydraulic. And that's why I tend to run them all the way to the bottom on that setup. So that way, if they ever leak out, then it's just like running 20 thousandths of lash on a lifter. Now, it's going to make noise, but it's definitely going to, it won't go away nearly as fast. So, yeah, that's going to be the hardcore tech. Any hate mail, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com. Send it there, and I'll get with it later sometime when I can. All right, Jonathan Couchy. Hey, Shane. Hey, Dallas. Long time no see. Had the 727 in the hot rod flasher from 2 to 3, and we tightened it up to kick down linkage, and now it works like a dream. Awesome. We love to hear that, man. It's always good to have one of your guys come back and say that, it's working bitchin'. I dig that, man. That's awesome.
Let's see.
Next step.
Jonathan Couchy is the next question, I guess.
Yes, he is. Next step is the Hot Rod 360 is fine-tune EHE. The QG vacuum. Oh, that's you right there.
Quadrajet vacuum secondaries kick. We think are going to loosen the secondary butterflies until it starts to bog and then tighten it up. There used to be a rule of thumb on that, was that the heavier the vehicle, the later you want the secondaries to come in, right?
Yeah.
What I found is I would start where you're at right now. And that slot in there is literally just a slot. It's a standard screw slot, okay? So you can easily clock it at 90 degrees. So just move it every 90 degrees. Line it straight up and down first. Go and run it, see what happens. And then move it 90 degrees to the left, backing it off. And then 90 degrees again, and 90 degrees, and 90 degrees until you have what you're looking for. Because then once you actually go past that point where, like you said, where it starts to bog, you tighten it back up 90 degrees and you're good to go. You're about as close as you're going to get.
Now, I've never ever tuned a Quadrajet. Is that's something that you can adjust on there? Like you can adjust the secondaries?
Quadrajet is probably more adjustable than a Holley, I would have to say.
Really?
Yeah. The secondary air door is run by a spring. Mm-hmm. And that spring is a wound spring that you can actually tighten or loosen.
Oh, okay.
And you can change when it comes in or when it goes out. That's what makes them ideal for stock limiter racing, because if you look at like a Ford might have like a motorcraft carburetor on, right? Mm-hmm. And they don't have that kind of adjustment. They don't have that flexibility. And the ticket for, like, if you're running a Ford in stock eliminator, if it isn't a Holley from the factory, you go find a Quadrajet intake manifold.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, because it's very adjustable. And the only downside to them is the air bleeds, like on a Holley. You know, on the original Holleys, they're not changeable at all, right? You're stuck with pressed in stuff. But if you look at later Holleys, they're all removable because they're screw in. And the Quadrajets are pressed in tubes for the air bleeds. And so you have to get a specific Quadrajet pressed in tube for, like, your idle circuit, your idle tube, and then your air bleeds themselves are pressed in. But what I always do is I just knocked out the pressed in piece that's in for the Quadrajet, and I tap it to a 632, and I just use Holley freaking air bleed stuff.
Yeah.
And it screws right in place.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Why don't we just tap that out and run it? That's one thing. Yeah, one thing I would like to do is one day is actually do a Quadrajet. I've never. There was always that term. Oh, it's a rock chucker. The Rochester Quadrajet.
Yeah.
So as soon as I saw something with that, we would just slowly take it off, step away.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people don't get them because all right. The same thing that makes it beneficial for the street is also its downfall.
Yeah.
It has the small primary. That's not really an issue. Usually the pumps can keep up with that. That's not really an issue. Tony always used to say that, and it's like, no, right? And then boiling fuel, boiling fuel in the bowl, no.
Really?
I've never had that problem ever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why that came to be a thing. It's like, man, if that fuel is sitting in there long enough, it's got a small fuel bowl, so it would be moving through fuel pretty quick. And as the fuel's moving, it stays cool.
It's cooling it down, yeah.
Right. And he'd say, like, oh, well, we used to drain the fuel bowls dry. Well, maybe the first couple of years of the Quadrajet, but if you think about it, the pump should be enough to sufficiently run the engine without even having a fuel bowl.
Yeah.
Right. So that's either way. The downside of them is they have the small primaries. And when you change over from the small primaries to getting on it and you get into those big secondaries, they're so big that when it comes in, if it comes in at improper time,
the quadribog,
you get the bog, right? Mm-hmm. People didn't understand that. What would happen is that secondary air door, like I said, is a spring, right? Well, after you do 40 billion secondary air door openings, that spring starts to get a little tired. And what it needs is you to go in there and adjust the spring a little bit.
Yeah.
Put a little bit more tension back into it because she's getting a bit weak. And that's what would always... Quadribog, what a piece of junk. Oh, okay. Well, if you knew what you were doing, it's not really that bad.
Yeah.
The primary circuit is the one that has all the stuff, right? That's where your primary metering rods, your primary jets. The secondary junk is like literally 2 metering rods and a hanger. and then your air doors. There's nothing else to it. There's nothing to break. There's nothing to go bad. But what makes them awesome for the street is you drive around on that 250 CFM primary, and it'll get really good mileage because it's got a really small primary. But you get into that sucker, and there comes 500 extra CFM or 550 CFM, depending on what year you got. They really work well on the street because it's a vacuum secondary carburetor, and they're really, really cheap. Like if you can't score one at a swap meet for less than $50, there's a problem, right?
Yeah. The only reason why I say this, I didn't watch any of Tony's videos about this, about the quadrojets. It was just one of the guys that I used to street race with. Is that when it was like say a Friday night, like during the summertime, and like we were going, like say we were in Escondido and we were going to go up to North Center City Parkway. He would get on the freeway, he would get off the freeway, and that thing would literally shut off. Like it would be idling and blip, 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 and then he would sit there and say, "Oh, I got to let it sit here and cool down for a minute." And then that's when he started explaining to me about how small the bowl was. He'd let it sit there and cool down for a little bit. It would start up and then run.
It's actually not the bowl; it's the pump.
It's the pump on that one.
The pump will get so hot that it'll vaporize the fuel on the inlet side, and then it can't suck the fuel.
Lock. Yeah, it's like a vapor lock.
The fuel.
That's exactly what I asked him. I asked him if it was a vapor lock, and he says no. And that's when he started explaining to me about the bowl size and this and that.
As soon as you turn the engine over, it shoots a big bunch of fuel up in there. Yeah. So I mean, it couldn't vaporize it fast enough for you to.
I got you.
Keep it from not starting, but the fuel pumps was always the problem on that. My dad had a Monza that had a 231 Buick V6 in it, and that sucker would do that. If on a hot day you drive it somewhere and it'd be running fine, you shut it off, and you better be in the store for 15 to 20 minutes, or it ain't gonna start. Right? And it would always vapor lock right there at the pump.
Yeah. Jonathan Couch, I've seen 4x4 power wagons get 22 miles per gallon quadrojet primaries. They're amazing for daily drivers. Yeah. I just never messed with one.
Yeah, you would like them. They're real simple and basic, but yet it's like it's actually one of those things that's like it's so simple it's stupid. Like, why did nobody else think of this?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Then you saying that, I just know I would love them then, because I love the simplicity of something that just works. You know, and that's why I like the Edelbrock carburetor for like people who run just daily driver stuff.
Those are simple. Those are real simple. They're simpler than a Q-Jet, right?
That is dumb simple. It's
right.
Like, and there's nothing to leak on them, and I just love how dumb the simplicity of them.
You'd like the Quadrojet because it's like the next step up from the Carter AFB. Oh. It's pretty much the same idea, but just applied to a larger secondary. That's what he was saying. It's a perfect street carburetor. In my opinion, it is the perfect street carburetor.
Yeah. So it's like everything, yeah. And this Jonathan Couchy once again says, thanks Dallas, the entire quadrojet has been rebuilt, works good. We are just fine tuning now. The truck pulls well. We haven't let it pass 3800s yet, so far yet, but enough to solve tuning problems. Well, that sounds awesome. Yeah. Did I miss one right here?
Max Wedge Dick Dashley says quadrojets sound good. They sound just as good as a thermoquad. When you get in that big secondary, golly, does it have nothing sounds like that.
Yeah, Mr. Gaskin makes an 1.5 inch spacer thick for the QJX and thermoquads. Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, so that way you can keep that thing from boiling, or getting hot.
There's actually a factory piece that you could buy. It came on I don't remember what it was on, Impalas maybe. But there is if you ever seen a factory cooling plate for a quadrojet, it look weird. You take the air cleaner off, and here's this big sheet aluminum plate, and it's sandwiched between the base of the carburetor and two gaskets, right? And it's just this big sheet aluminum plate, and you're like, man, that looks so out of place because it's twice as big as the carburetor, right? And what it is that sheet of aluminum dissipates so much heat so quickly that it keeps all the heat from the intake manifold from boiling the gas in the carburetor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've actually seen that. I was actually making one for my Slant 6 for that exact same thing, because I'm going to go back to just regular Edelbrock before I put the VRS on it, and I'm going to put a sheet underneath it for that exact reason. I'm going to put 2 gaskets and the sheet, just so that way it dissipates the heat on that thing faster. Do the quadrojets heat soak like the AFBs when you go into the store on a hot day and it don't want to start?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, they do. Because mine will do the same thing. In fact, when I'm coming back from TCI during the summertime in my Dart, I'm on the 72 for like 30 miles, and then you come basically to a red light, and that red light is an 11-minute light. I have my electric fans going and everything going, and you can literally watch that RPM go from 900 RPM to 800 to 700 and start to idle a little funky as
the one thing about the Q-Jet that's like really big pain in the ass is that guys will put big cams in something and then they throw a quadrojet on it. And the quadrojet is like the world's worst carburetor when it comes to camshaft, because the power piston that runs directly off a vacuum is so small in diameter that when you change the vacuum signal, this thing is really affected bad, right?
Well, that makes sense.
And the Carter AFB isn't as bad because the power piston is twice as big. And so it's a lot more forgiving when it comes to vacuum signal. If you'll ever notice, like, any of the GM stuff that was ever real high performance stuff, right? Like, let's say you take a DZ302 69 Camaro. It came with a Holley on it. Why? Because the camshaft was so radical that if they put a Q-Jet on there, it wouldn't know what to do. It was either fat or it was lean, and it just never ran right. So they just forego the issue, put a Holley on it, and then it works fine because the Holley, let's face it, the Holley was designed for drag racing with big cams. That's the only purpose of it. That was the sole purpose of it.
Well, this guy who had that Chevy that I was telling you about that we go out street race with, he had a big cam in it. Like, not a monster cam, but it was like, your Dumka 3030 cam. So like 230, 230 on a 108.
It doesn't like overlap. That's the big one.
And it had a 108 LSA on it. So it had a big boogity cam, and that's where it would just come off the freeway and it would just die. And now that makes sense. Okay, so that makes sense. All right, well, we got one here, right here.
Well, there was one I saw a little bit earlier. Hold on a second. There was one about somebody had an inline 6 that would run 230 degrees.
I didn't see that one.
We must have went past that.
See here. Right here. Is this it? Tom Brown? Finally put gauges on my...
Yep.
Is this it? Finally put gauges on my old 70 Chevy C20. It had a 250 inline. Turns out it's running at around 235 degrees after warm-up, running or idling. 75-25 coolant mix, but it doesn't not overheat. Bad gauge, maybe?
I had a bad gauge on a car one time. It ran 250 degrees, and I was sweating bullets, and I went and hit it with a heat gun, and it was like 175.
Go buy yourself at Harbor Freight. Get one of those little guns on it, and just check it.
Here's the thing. I've already learned this the hard way. I do not buy any Chinesium Equus gauges at all, ever again. I go right on Amazon, and I get myself, not an autometer, but there used to be a gauges called Auto Gauge, which was autometer gauges that were made in Taiwan, right? It's autometer standards, and generally what I find is they're about half the price of an autometer gauge, and they work.
They work.
They work,
exactly. Yes, they work.
Yeah, but if it is running, I've been having to deal with this here recently. Okay, let me tell you my plight with this. My Suburban would start running up 180, 186, 190, 192, and it wouldn't come down. As I'm idling in traffic or I'm driving around, it didn't matter. It would always go up, and I could not figure out for the life of me what was going on. I ran coolant flush through the radiator 3 or 4 times, and then I got to looking at, I wonder if there's something stupid, because the only time I've ever had a Buick run hot on it is if I had the vacuum advance hooked up to non-ported vacuum.
Yep.
Okay?
I was just going to say that.
Just run straight vacuum.
Uh-huh.
And what it was is I look at where it's at on the carburetor. It's on the ported carburetor side, the one that you, on the Quadrojet, if you look at the very front of the carburetor, on the right-hand side, about halfway up the carburetor, there's a port. That's actually for your vacuum advance. That is ported vacuum for the vacuum advance, and that's the way it came from factory. My vacuum advance canister had failed, and then this thing was collapsing as soon as it got vacuum on it. So it'd pull all maximum vacuum in there just at an idle, right? And I could not. It didn't have any spark knock or pinging noise from inside. But when I figured out what the problem was, I drove it around. I'd stick my head out, and I could hear it spark knocking outside the car. So I don't know if she's beat the bearings out of it yet. I don't know. I'm not doing a damn thing until it stops running. But that was my problem, is that it had that vacuum advance canister was pulling too much vacuum. Now, if you have that thing running to straight vacuum, that will cause it to heat up like that and continue to get hot. The other thing I found out is you want to look at the flow differential from one tank to the next, right? So John Wilburn taught me about this. What I ended up doing was taking an old water bottle, and I put my garden hose, I threaded it and ran the garden hose into the water bottle. And then I taped the water bottle with some duct tape into the inlet side of the radiator. And I turned that sucker on full blast, right? And I'd have it fill up on the other side, fill up a gallon jug, and see how long it takes to fill it up. Then just do it with a hose to see how long it takes to fill up. There should be no difference because that radiator has so much surface area that it should flow straight across. Yep. But if you see a big difference between the two, start looking at your radiator being the issue.
The culprit, yeah, it's got stuff in it, yeah. Also, too, one thing I've noticed is that he said 75-25 coolant mix. I'm hoping that means 75% water, because that could also be it too. Because coolant is not a very good. It's not actual coolant. It's for
antifreeze.
It's antifreeze. Yeah, that's right. So I would run it the other way, you know.
Yeah, if it's 75 water and 25 coolant, it's probably fine.
It's probably fine, but if it's the other way around, that could be your issue too.
But check your gauge, check all that stuff. All right, thoughts on an Olds 461, 30 over 455, 71 D-Bird block, newer Edelbrock alloy, heads, Edelbrock torque intake, HEI distributor, 750 Holley, Jericho 4-speed, Chevelle 12-bolt with 390s.
Sounds like a healthy setup.
That should be a freaking really screaming monster.
That sounds like every single street car that from the 80s and 90s right there. I mean, that sounds like everything that you'd want. That's good 500 horse type of deal right there. 550 horse.
Yeah, that combo sounds like it'd be really good. The Oldsmobile doesn't like to spin. It doesn't like the RPM because the mains on the Oldsmobile are the only ones bigger than the Buick mains. We solved that. They're like a 3.5-inch main on an Oldsmobile. So that means it does not like RPM. But here's the caveat to that. If you ever went and looked at an Oldsmobile cylinder head, the ports are about the size of a Cleveland. So you got this head that wants to flow like mad with a bottom end that doesn't like to rev, right? It was just, I don't know. I'm not gonna bust on the guy's balls. Like it's bad engineering in my opinion. It is.
But that sounds like an awesome setup, man. I mean,
I think
you're good to 5,500.
If you wanted to make an Oldsmobile run really hard, really awesome, you get it the biggest cubic inch you could. Throw the biggest stroker crank in that sucker that you possibly could to make those heads work where they're supposed to work, but at lower RPM. And you know, there's nothing wrong with that big 3.5-inch main. 5-inch stroke would fix that problem. So,
right, yeah. Then, but you'll be able to use the head. But,
right.
I had a friend who had one at Olds, and he used to shift it. And we'd all go to like 6,500. He was doing about 55. Sometimes he would miss a shift to get to 6,000.
Was it a small block though?
I don't remember. I don't remember. Could have been a small.
Olds are like an intermediate block. They're actually, one is a tall deck, one's a short deck. That's the only difference between the two.
I don't remember, but I remember he couldn't rev nearly as high because he'd always say, "I can't rev like you guys go on Olds," but. I mean, he was always there. He would just short shift it, and he would just use the torque. So
yeah, and that's what those things are famous for.
Yeah. A Mopar Man 1970 said, I made a small heat plate for the Slant 6 one-barrel out of aluminum diamond plate. The carb was cold and had sweat on the outside while the engine bay was hot. Well, I can see that happening.
How did you make that on a diamond plate?
Yeah, how's you going to get it to seal?
Yeah, you would never seal on the carburetor.
Yeah. I don't know. I was just going to make mine out of a sheet aluminum, that you can get at what's that place right here? Home Depot. Yeah, so I was just going to make it, cut a hole and stamp it out and call it good. Okay, let's see. Maxwell Dick Dashley had a Carter on a 400 that would empty every morning and had to suck the gas line and spit in the carburetor every day.
Oh,
Dude, Yeah, you know what's funny about that is I had a friend that had one of those little like water squirt bottles, and he put gas in it with a tip on it, and he had to do the exact same thing. He would squirt it down the holes and get that thing fired up because it would just boil off the gas, and it would take forever the thing to start up. It almost kill his batteries.
So there's on a quadrojet, there's actually a trick to this. All the later quadrojets all came with what they called a windowed seat.
Yeah.
All the early quadrojets come with a non-windowed seat, right? And the seats are virtually reusable. You can just put a new needle in them, right? You just got to make sure that the seat is clean when you put the new needle in. But if it has windows in it, the window is about a quarter of the way up the seat. Mm-hmm. If it's non-windowed, the gas has to come out the top of the seat and fill the entire bowl before it's actually full, right? When you shut the car off, if you have the windowed seat, the fuel will leak back into the fuel line and drain, since it's not running, will drain back into the fuel system. But with a non-windowed seat, the entire bowl stays full. So when you go to start the car, it starts right up because it's got fuel already in the bowl. So you just get the non-windowed seat.
Awesome. Let's see here. Jonathan Couchy. Hey, Dallas, a question for you might like. What's the difference between the Olds 215 V8 and the Buick 215 V8?
Okay, there's not a lot of difference. Matter of fact, the engine was designed to be in both cars to be the same engine. Oldsmobile didn't like that. I mean, you got to remember, way back when in '61, when this engine came out, there was no corporate engine, right? They didn't share anything like that. It was always their own stuff. Yeah. So when you look at the Olds 215 and the Buick 215, their short block is actually very similar. It has the same bore, same stroke. It's aluminum. But what happens is you get to the Oldsmobile and it has a completely different cylinder head. It has a wedge-style head. The Buick has what they call a semi-hemispherical head.
Yeah, and the spark plugs in.
Right. And so the Buick actually technically made 5 to 10 horsepower more. But Oldsmobile didn't like Buick's design with the flimsy 4 bolts per cylinder, and 2 of them were shared with the other cylinder. So it's like literally like 2.5 bolts, right, or 3 bolts. Right. So Oldsmobile added in some more bolts to bolt the cylinder head on. So it had, I want to say, actually the early Buick 215, instead of having 4, it had 6, and I think Oldsmobile had 7. I think was the big thing. But they have 1 extra bolt compared to the Buick. The Buick head can be used on the Oldsmobile. The Oldsmobile head can be used on the Buick. But I think, I can't remember. I think that bolt hole has to be plugged or capped or put a plug in it. But other than that, they're kind of mix and match. It did come with Oldsmobile specific valve covers. The Buicks, they were on Buick specific. And then if you want to talk about the history of it, the Olds 215 was actually what evolved into the Repco V8, which was the Formula One engine of choice in the 1970s, which originally was the Oldsmobile 215.
Jonathan Couchy's back on this International. Now try and imagine getting an International 392 to rev to 5,000 and read about it. A few guys that did. It wasn't easy. God, I think... You know, we've talked about this months and months and months ago. I think I want to find an International 392.
I'm not even going to find one. I just need to find a book that tells you some stuff about it, because it might have a main journal that's 5.5 inches in diameter, right? There's
got to be something
face it,
wrong.
International was making tractors, and they moved into the automotive realm, right? Yeah. So they would have taken what they learned from tractors and applied it to a car. And I bet you this thing was never, ever meant to rev beyond 4,500.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's the thing with hot rodders, too. If this thing was awesome to race, it would have been raced.
Someone would have done it, yeah. Look at it like this. Every engine that was ever built and designed went on a top fuel dragster at one point in time. Did you ever hear of the International 392 on a top fuel dragster?
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. It probably was just a flop.
Yeah. Your garage door's opening again.
It is.
There we go. My Uncle Sonny always said, don't take it over 6,000 if you want it to still drive it home. He's talking about the Olds.
Oh.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's right.
olds have the oil starvation issue pretty bad, like the Buick.
Mopar man saying he ground the diamonds off the area where the gasket goes. At that point, man, just go spend $5 at Home Depot and get yourself a piece of aluminum. You know, all that time I'd just spent more time in making the angle to make it look better. I don't know. Let's see what we got here. We have a 4-ring pack for some industrial stuff.
I bet it does. I bet that 392 did. It has 4 rings on it.
Yeah.
It probably has also like a wrist pin that's like a 2-inch diameter wrist pin. That was always a big thing. And a full skirt piston.
Right. Yeah, right. It was massive, probably. I scored some awesome green line SW. What's an SW? Oh,
Stuart Warner.
Stuart Warner gauges, yeah. Pistol mount tack at the auction the other day. Well, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That sucker's probably reliable as sunrise.
Yeah, yeah. Gent the couch, we had a crack on one of those in the International 304s in the garage. Mains weren't any larger than your typical small block in diameter. However, in width, though, they were a bit larger. Not too bad, though. Well, that's not...
Width is not
terrible.
really the problem.
Yeah, it's not terrible. I mean, you're going to cut down on some parasitic loss, but it's not going to be as big of a problem as a big diameter because then you have oiling. Yeah.
The diameter is the issue. When it's wide like that, it actually gives it more hydraulic wedge area, right?
Yes.
So,
yeah. But yeah, a lot of people will narrow up the bearings on the rods, just so that way they cut down on. But that's splitting hairs. I mean, that's for people who are trying to find every last horsepower.
Well, I think I told you on the white Ford truck, that's what I did on it. I used the narrowed bearings.
Yeah.
They were. I noticed they were like 10 cents cheaper. And I bought them. And I'm like, wow, these suckers are really narrow, right? And I read what it was for. It's like, hey, this is to miss the fillets on the aftermarket race cranks and stuff. And I'm like, well, I got a stock crank, and it doesn't care. So I just put it on there. Yeah, man, has it got oil pressure? Yeah, but how long will it have oil pressure? No, it's still going today. I actually sold it not too long ago.
Yeah, you won't have any issue with that at all. Because I always tell people it doesn't really matter as long, by the time you take the surface area, when you do your rod, clearance, 2 rod clearances, you add up the area on that. It's so massive, it's going to piss out all that oil anyways. Because you're thinking it's 2,000ths between the rod bearing and the journal, so it's massive.
Right, you're talking 30 weight oil at 200 degrees. So
yeah,
it's just pouring out. It's just what do they call it in the Buick community? What do they call it? I just heard this at the Nationals this year. Hemorrhaging oil. That's
hemorrhaging.
What they call it.
That's the word for it, hemorrhaging, right?
Yes. Yeah. Like you can't even watch the crank because it's just hemorrhaging out of all of the rods, mains, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. So Colleen's asking a kind of a question here, and this is actually a legitimate question. Mopar 1978 diamond plate steel, though, which dissipates heat better, aluminum or steel? Aluminum is
always
going to.
Aluminum.
Always aluminum, and it's because it's so porous. And here's the thing is that, and this is going to segue to another part, is that's why when you put cylinder heads on an engine, if you have like say 9.5 to 1 compression, and you put cylinder heads aluminum on, that's exactly 9.5 to 1 compression, you're actually going to lose a little bit of power if all the ports are equal and everything, because the aluminum is going to dissipate the heat so fast. You're
actually like losing a point of compression ratio.
100 point, exactly. You got to add one more point to get the same amount of thermal efficiency out of the cylinder head.
That's why,
the aluminum with the steel. Yeah.
Well, that's why you always find that an aluminum cylinder head always has like a 2 or 3 cc chamber size difference, and that's because if you take them off your 8.5 to 1 engine, when you put these on, they're going to be 9.5 to 1. Yeah. That's what you want, because that's the only way it's going to run equal.
Yeah, but then because you have a higher compression, you're going to make more power, but as far as how much heat you're going to lose if it was exactly equal, they will actually make less power because of thermal efficiency in the head. It won't have the heat cycle on it. It dissipates heat so rapidly, it just cools the charge down. You just won't make it. It'll run like crap. All right, max wedge. My dad shifted his 446 pack 6,000. Mopar shut off at 4 replacement engines. Oh, shut him off. And he was shifting at 6,000. Man,
You're talking 440 though.
Oh yes, okay, yeah. But my 440 though, mine was a 6-pack 440. It was a 6-pack. I had 6-pack rods on it, but I took the 6-pack off, sold it, and then I put a Holly on it. Could have been. I don't know. I used to shift mine at about 6,500, and it was a completely stock bottom end. I only blew it up when I put nitrous to it. So, and then I went looking for another one. That's actually when I found out about the 440 difference between a 440 and a 400, and that's when I was like, oh yeah, I want the 400 stuff. Let's see here on those internationals. Oh, here we go back to the internationals. But on those internationals, a cheap upgrade for valve springs are big block Chevy valve springs to get more RPM. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to find a book on these things. There's got to be something. You know, Amazon's got to have a book.
I bet you I have a book. I have a Chilton's downstairs from 1972, and it has everything under the sun in it. I'll bet you the International is in there. I don't know if they were making travel alls in 72, but I think they went from like 65 to like 78 or something like that.
Yeah. He's just confirming aluminum's better by a long shot. It's not just that it's better. It's like light years better. There was a guy who had a custom ported EQ Magnum heads, and he had some ported Indy heads for his 360. He lost power. Yes, that is absolutely correct, and that happens quite a bit.
The Magnum is like a fast burn, right?
Yes,
it's like the Vortex Chevy or a Ford GT40P.
Yep,
it's a fast burn cylinder head.
Yeah, and what made the Magnums really good is the efficiency on the exhaust. So a small block Mopart's got a really efficient exhaust, but the Magnum was even better. And but it's also a fast burn as far as the chamber size go, and it just worked really well. And then when people go to the aluminum ones, they actually lose power. So that's why, that's 100%
and
true.
if you don't know what the difference between a fast burn and a regular Chevrolet small block cylinder head, if you hold them up and you look at the chamber, the fast burns, it doesn't matter which one you have, a Ford GT40P, a Magnum, a Chevrolet Vortex, they're shaped like a heart, right? They have more quench area in the head, and then if you look at the plug, the angle on the plug is generally changed in direction of the intake valve, right? So that's where you find that, like in Ford GT40P, you swap them on your 5-liter Mustang, and your headers don't fit anymore. It's because your plugs are hitting the header, right? So, those are generally the changes that are made when they did those fast burn style cylinder heads. That was all the 90s rage. I remember you used to be able to go to the junkyard, pull a 90s truck motor out, pop the intake manifold off, buy this specific Vortex intake manifold, and drop it in your car and have 400 horse and go run 12 O's the day is long, right?
Yeah.
That was the ticket. Everybody was doing those, and I was looking at Ford GT40Ps, right? Because they were dime a dozen. It's like I remember when the what was it? Firestone tires? It was Firestones, right? On the Explorers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay,
They're
when that
up,
thing came out, the junkyard would have rows and rows and rows of that Explorer. And the Explorer was the best-selling SUV in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there would be so many of them that you could pick your make, model, color, whatever year you wanted, and it was in the junkyard. And people would get rid of them. Oh, God, it's a rollover king. I got 40,000 miles. Might as well get rid of this unsafe bastard. No, go put another set of Bridgestones on it, and you'll be fine, dude. It's not a problem. But they were littered, the junkyards, and you could get the heads all day long. And what was neat was, generally at the same time, when you're pulling your cylinder heads off of your Explorer, you could look right across to the other side of the row, and there might be a Lincoln Mark 7, right? Well, Lincoln Mark 7s came with a HO 5-liter motor with forged pistons up to 1992, right?
Get that, yeah.
You buy that whole motor, pull the heads off, throw your P's on that block just to pay for one engine, and you pay the $78.95 at freaking Pick and Pull, and you got yourself a damn near racing Ford small block with 400 horse. It's got forged pistons in it.
Yeah, I did that quite a bit. Yeah, the P-Series head, that was a thing. And when the Hemis first were like all the rage, when they first came out, like in the mid-2000s, right? I was still doing the Magnum thing, and I was really like, because they were just in the wrecking yard just like that. They were just stacked all over the place, and you could pick them up cheap. And so that's when I started coming out. There's a few people in here who got my recipe that I have. It's 450 horse for a set of EQ 318 heads, which are like the Engine Quest 318 replacement heads, but you can put them on the 360s. They flow a ton. And then you could get the Edelbrock Performer RPM ones unported, and I believe it was 461. And I had a camshaft for them, and this is all for the hydraulic roller stuff. And it was it was a basic recipe with a 650 carburetor. I even had what jetting to use, what timing to set up on, and it every single time would just hit that number or 5 or above. It was always
the problem I always had with it was like, okay, the GT40P, the recipe for that was like 302, junkyard 302. It didn't matter what it came out of, right? It just needed a flat top piston motor, right? So you're generally looking at any of the cars, and then you threw the P heads on it and you put an E-cam in. Well, we found when you run the E-cam, the variances in the E-cam were so much that one motor would be down 10 horsepower, one motor would be up 25, and you couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. And it was just, the cams were just, I mean, they were ground in the USA, but it was like, hey, Schneider, late at night when you guys are done grinding cams, grind some of these for us, right? And that's what they do. And the tolerances were like all over the place. So the ticket used to be, we would call your old boss Billy Godbold, and you for running in the factory stock class in the NMRA, the National Mustang Racers Association, you would take the E-cam profile and you send it to Billy Godbold, and you'd have a comp camshaft ground with the same exact profile, but now it's dead nuts perfect on a billet core that doesn't flex, and you'd gain 30 horse over your factory camshaft with the same numbers, or your E-cam with the same numbers, same profile, same lift, same duration, all of it. But it had everything to do with that inconsistency of that camshaft grind.
Yeah, he's just talking about this. And here's another one. Another perk of the 400 Mopar is that there was more meat in the main saddle area of the block. Yes, but there was a few of them. You're talking about the winterized block, and those were like only for like, I believe it was like 2 years. But yes, most 400s did on average have more meat in the saddle area. But there was a winterized block, and those things went, I must have had 2 or 3 of those things at one time. And I don't even remember what I did with them. I think I might have just sold those cheap. But those were the very first Mopar factory block that could easily handle 800 horsepower because of how thick the main webbing was on the mains, because it was designed for cold weather. So it was like extra thick in those areas. And so you could find them on like cars. You would look for a car that had a 400 and it had a plug-in, like a plug-in heater, like it had a cord going to it, and that was a winterized block. And I would look for them in the Ram Chargers, in the trucks that were either military or they were the highway patrol ones, because they were up in the altitude. Yeah. So in California, this is in California.
Actually, when you got the highway patrol one, it came with all of those doodads, no matter where you were at.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, but the military ones, you had to look for just a plug-in or like something like that. But yeah, that was the
the 70s always gets this bad rap about being the dark era of automotive engineering. Actually, there was a lot of neat shit that came out around that time. Your 400 Mopar came out around that time. The 400 Cleveland, which everyone calls the 400 modified. It's actually just a tall deck Cleveland. That's how you ended up with 427 cubic inch Cleveland motors, was they'd take the crank out of one of those.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of neat stuff that was made during that period that it doesn't get a lot of credit. The one that's, in my opinion, is one of the coolest things, but it's a turd. Okay, and I like. He got me thinking about that 400 Mopar. It has the extra meat in the main saddle, right? Have you heard of a 403 Oldsmobile?
Yes, I actually have heard of a 403.
The 403 is a small block Olds. And remember I told you that there's 2 different block deck heights. That's really the difference between them, okay? The small blocks, every single one of them had a 3.378-inch stroke, I think. Every one of them, right? So you go down to 260 cubic inches all the way up to 403. Same stroke. So that means that 403 had a gonzo bore that you could have probably piloted a balloon down into the bore on that sucker, right? A hot air balloon. The neat thing is you could use a crank out of a 330 Oldsmobile, which was steel, with that same stroke, same main journal size, and drop it right in that 403. But the 403 block, it was like, all right, hey, we're going to build this awesome block, but let's go ahead and brain fart right away before we start off. And they took all the meat out of the webbing of the block, out of the main webs, and they called them windowed mains. You could literally look right down the mains.
Yeah.
Like above the main surface. There was 2 big windows right alongside. And you're like, what in the world were they thinking? So supposedly there was a few blocks made that were non-windowed main 403s, and they ended up in pro stock in the AHRA. Because in AHRA, the cool thing was you could run a small block and nitrous to make up the difference of the big cubic inches, and then, or if you ran a big block, it would be up to 500 cubes.
Wow.
And they were trying to keep the regular guy in, so you could run a small block on nitrous and run in pro stock. And there was a dude that showed up like 1981, had a Firebird Formula Pontiac with those years they came with like a 403 Oldsmobile. And it had one of those weird 403 non-windowed main blocks, and then and that's what ended up becoming the DRCE of Warren Johnson. If you know anything about pro stock, the drag race competition engine from General Motors was primarily an Oldsmobile with a big block Chevrolet crank in it.
Yep.
And that was the engine that started that whole thing, was that 403 in AHRA Pro Stock that won the national championship in like 1980 or 81 or 79, somewhere around there. One of those years. But they was running small block on nitrous oxide. And then it was like a 440 cubic inch small block.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so Jonathan Couch, he says, Shane, question for you. Was running LA heads on a 318 poly block a thing that the block is so beefy and strong? Block. No, I don't personally know that. I know of it the other way. There was a lot of people taking the LA blocks and putting the poly heads on there because they flowed so much better.
That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make a poly Hemi small block 3840 motor, right?
Well, I actually did this. I made a couple cams for this because the lifters are in different areas, so you got the firing order is a little different as far as where the valve arrangement is. And I'm not going to name the company, but I made a couple custom camshafts for this, and it worked awesome because they ported that thing out and it flowed like 300 CFM, this poly 318 head, and it was like something. It was almost like 82% between the intake and the exhaust as far as flow rating.
This question has come up a couple of times, and here's what I've always wanted to do. Did you know that the poly 318 blocks are actually beefier and thicker, and you can take one and bore it to 340 size?
Yeah. No. Yeah. Right? I totally get it. Yeah. Because they were.
Here's what I was looking at. Tony would say, he said, when the last time this came up on a live, because I was really geeked out about it. I'm like, man, we should make a poly Hemi and see what would happen. You run it on nitromethane, and because if you think about it, these cylinder heads actually have the same, if not better, potential than a Hemi.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly, because the valve arrangement. Yeah,
right. And I'm like, this would be the ticket. And he said that the exhaust side on them sucks so bad.
It does.
Does it?
Yes, he's correct, and that's the thing is that it sucks up to a point. Now, for a person like me or you who's going to street race this or make a hot rod, it's totally fine. But to get out that exhaust on a nitromethane or nitrous or supercharged, you would have to run so much duration on the exhaust. It would just be
here's
ridiculous.
Where Vizard actually brought into something. I called him about, I was doing the Jack the Giant Killer 300 Buick, and it's got really dinky exhaust valves on this thing, right?
Yeah.
And I talked to him about, look, I can't really get it to flow anymore. It's got these dinky exhaust valves, and I can't really open them up much because the intakes have been opened up. So now they're like virtually touching, right? And I can't go any bigger on the exhaust side. What can I do? He said, there's a trick to this. This is what guys used to do in NASCAR back in the 70s and late 60s when they were running factory cylinder heads. It's compression.
Yes.
And the higher the compression, the faster the exhaust will flow.
Yep. Yeah.
Right?
And you can also take care of that too with the camshaft. But yes, you run that compression.
He also said the other thing that you can do if you don't have much options for any more compression is you change the rod length, because what will happen is it'll come up to top dead center faster with a shorter rod.
Yeah.
Right? And it'll push that exhaust out easier. Or quicker, because it's coming up so quick.
Yeah. Let's go here. Using a Slant 6 saw lifter engine for an example, what determines the lash measurement? Why different lash settings for different cams? Because it's the master of the camshaft. The profile. I call it a master. You can call it a profile. But basically, when the camshaft starts to come in, there's a ramp rate. It depends on how. I know. I'll try. I'll try to say it as easily as I can. Here.
Well, no, it's simple. What it is the lash is to take up the difference between the valve train and that lifter face crashing against the cam lobe.
And
right?
and also too, it takes it up, but it's got to take it up before it exponentially speeds up. Because once it takes up the lash, that cam is going to move really fast. Because on a solid, you can move it really fast as the foot of the lifter. Where a hydraulic, you can only move them so fast. Now they can come off the seat faster than a solid, but a solid can actually physically move faster.
It can ramp faster because there's no play in the valve train once the lash is taken up.
That is correct. Yeah, exactly. The basically limiting factor of that becomes your push rod or the foot of the lifter.
Well, and what's neat was you remember the old Engine Masters magazine, and when they used to do that shootout where you had all these engine builders from all over the country build stuff. Like I think the guy that won the very first one was Steve Sherman's dad, Joe Sherman. Yeah,
Mopar.
Yeah, and Joe Sherman was a magician when it came to this stuff because he had been screwing with them for so long, right? But if you remember, way back when that magazine was hot, and you used to be able to go get Engine Masters magazine, which had nothing to do with the BS that goes on freaking whatever that weird shit was.
It was real stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and these guys would... Okay, I'll tell you how science out they had it out. This is where the push rods would blue on some of the engines. They couldn't figure out why they would blue. They would turn blue like you heated them with a torch after you ran the engine. And what they were doing was that ramp rate and the harmonic frequency of the engine at whatever RPM they were running it at was those two were in, I guess, in succession or in harmonic frequency, resonant frequency, and it would cause that push rod to literally resonate at a frequency, and it would blue right in the center of the push rod, nowhere else, just the center of the push rod, and it was like about 1.5 inches wide. And it was a weird thing because for like 2 years when guys were doing those, it was the Cleaver Fords. The Cleaver Fords was the ones doing it, and they couldn't figure out what it was, and they ended up, somebody had sat down and figured out that a quarter of that frequency resonant wavelength was the exact length of the push rods that they were using, so it was causing it to blue in the center because the push rod was resonating at the frequency and it was flexing in the center from it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's genius stuff.
Yeah.
Back when Engine Masters was a real show or a real thing.
Right. Clint, Street Machine says, from what I've read, the 77 to 79 400 had the most meat in the main journal of the regular production blocks. Not sure where they compare to winterized blocks. Yeah, I believe it's. I think Wilburn says it right here. I think the last 3 digits were 230. And they were obscenely thick. Now, they were thick, and this is where people call them the winterized blocks, but they just happen to be in what I noticed, what I would look for them in, is in those trucks that would have the plug-ins, or they would be in like the commercial vehicles or the military or the highway patrol. Yeah, that's where I saw them. But those were those obscenely thick ones. But if you find one that says 230 on it, I believe that's the number you're looking for on the side of a 400 block. But they've been so ramped up nowadays. I mean, to find one of those blocks, someone's gonna say, "Oh, it's $2,000 because it's the 230 and it's the winterized block. It's the big thick main cap."
Well, the 302 when they started getting hard to come by, like that was probably what 2010. Yeah. So they stopped making them in like 2001. So but start looking at 10 years later, that's when they start to get kind of hard to come by, right? Yeah. And I remember the ticket used to be it's a XXX 302 block. Ooh, man. And then it's like, where are you guys getting this from? XXX, like, that's just porn, like that means nothing. And come to find out that XXX block is literally like nothing special about it at all, but guys were paying $100 more because it had XXX cast in the lifter valley.
Jonathan's couch is asking a question. In fact, it's funny. I just had this question just today. I'm not going to name the engine shop, but he actually, I was at work today, and one of the guys at Comp goes, "Hey, you're kind of a Slant 6 guru guy." And I said, "I got a little bit." So one of the guys from one of the called me up and says, "Hey, we got this problem." So he goes, "Shane, is there any issues with running a solid flat tappet cam on a hydraulic flat tappet Slant 6? My brother and I are going to set up a BBD like the Feather Duster BBD with a lean burn on it." Okay. Yes and no. Here's the thing: is that you have to run. If you're going to run a solid flat tappet on a hydraulic flat tappet Slant 6, you're going to have to change the rocker arms, and you're going to have to change the shaft, because they oil coming down through the rocker arms. That's how they oil the hydraulic. There's no oil provisions in the lifters, so they have to come down. So typically, either on some of those, I've seen them that the rear bearing has got a full circle groove on them, or someone has cut a groove in the actual cam, and that's how it's getting high pressure up there. Typically on a hydraulic too, the head's a little different in the valve and as far as where it bolts down on. So there's a few things you're going to have to change. So you're going to need adjustable rocker arms with the matching shaft for the rocker arms, and then you're going to have to find some sort of timed port on it, or if you're rebuilding it, if you email me, I'll tell you exactly what to do. I have a whole thing on Slant Daily Garage on what to do with this. I cut the whole groove in the back, and then in the block, I tapped that out, and I put a set screw in there with a 190,000 set screw hole in it. So what that does is that you're still running high pressure oil up there, constant high pressure instead of timed, so that way you can keep the valve train cool, but then you're cutting down on
how much you're sending to the top.
Sending the top, plus it goes to the camshaft before it goes to the number 4 main and to the number 6 rod.
Oh, so it sends more oil down below too.
Yes, it keeps that pressure high on those. And the reason why people are like, well, the Slant 6 works just fine. Yes, you're correct on a Slant 6 with the stock Slant 6, but when you're putting more lift, more spring pressure, and so on and so forth, there's not enough oil to cool that, because you will cook those springs. And that's why most Slant 6s have a gummed up top end, is because they'll run the piss out thing. There's not enough oil up there to cool the springs, and the springs are literally cooking the oil and burning it all up in the top end. So what I do is I run a shit ton of oil up there, and that keeps everything nice and cool, because I literally drive mine for 24 hours straight. I left Tennessee and drove straight to Tucson at 80 miles an hour. I didn't even shut it off to fill it up. I just left it running, filled it up, got back on it, 2,700 RPM. I did that for 24 hours, and I didn't burn up anything. Made 3 passes, won my match race, and then the next day got in it, drove 24 hours back home, and that was something. That was when the first year I was here I did that. So I do that so that way I can keep the springs nice and cool. So yes, that's what you can do, and it's on my Slant Daily Garage. Go to my playlist. It goes under Slant 6, and it'll say oil lifter hydraulic camshaft oiling problems or something like that. I forget what it is, but it's in there. You can't miss it. I want to say that I'm glad to see Dallas is back. Yeah, me too. And you sound great, right? I'm happy. The same guy.
I'm getting better. I'm not 100% yet, but I'm getting close.
The same guy we all know and love. Keep up the positive attitude and just being you. I agree with that. And see, I'm glad. And awesome. So I was happy when he said that he was going to come on to the live today. So yes. Friend of mine.
Sorry, John. I had to kick John Wilburn to the curb.
Hey, you know what? I got to give John Wilburn props, man. It's tough to come on here and do tech talk. You know what I mean?
I do. I've been through a few of the changes on Tech Talk.
Yeah, it's fast paced, and you have to know what you're doing. You know what I mean? It's a
not
little
easy.
nervy.
It's actually not easy at all.
No, it's not. It's fun. You're talking cars, but sometimes you say something wrong or do something wrong, whatever, and you just make it up the next week. No one's perfect, so it is.
Yeah, the hard part is actually, in my opinion, is keeping up with the chat and keeping it engaging for everyone, and then especially when it lulls, right? Like when there's no questions, it's like, what do you do, right? You're like, I don't know. You just got to make something up, and that's why you just kind of start talking shop and talking stories. Then bench racing.
I keep a notepad. What I do is, I make notes. So if it ever starts to lull, what I do is I have a notepad over here, and I just have like little antidotes on there of different things that can segue into different things for tech talk. So that's why I just have that sitting right here. So I just I have a bunch of different questions right there and just things to talk about. So a friend of was a mechanic at a Dodge garage. There was a new car that had a throttle body that frosted up in 90-degree weather. They recalled all of them. Huh. I never. Oh, Mr. Wilbur, he enjoyed it.
Yeah, speak of the devil and he shall appear.
right. Oh yeah, but it was fun. I enjoyed having Mr. Wilburn on here. Sometimes I'd unknowingly put him on the spot, and I'm sorry, John. I'm sorry. I apologize, but we had a good time, man.
Hook, Line, and Fishing says when there's nothing to talk about, I'd bring up the Scion gasser, and I like gasser anything. I always wanted a PT Cruiser gasser or a Chevrolet HHR gasser.
I wanted the Prowler.
Oh, a gasser out of one of those?
Yeah, because the PT Cruiser is one thing, but it's short. But the Prowler had that body. Imagine if you
God, you're talking about that's like an Intrepid drivetrain in the rear, right? I mean, it's completely wrong wheel drive, everything about it.
But
right?
it would be perfect because it would look
you
like.
Think so? And make it like a 554 coupe, like something like that.
That would be something. If one of the guys out here wants to do something cool, find yourself a Prowler that's just destroyed, and then just put it on a frame and make it a gasser. That would be awesome. Make it all cartoonish, with the shifter way up here,
the motor way too big for the car.
Right? Make it like a cartoon, put on the big wig and just brrr,
Yeah.
Oh, man, can you believe this? We only got 5 minutes left? What?
It flew by tonight, huh?
Wow. All right, so yeah. Well, let's see. Moving on. What do we got here?
Gasser Prius. You know what I always wanted to do? I always wanted to do something like a Prius.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind getting a Tesla. And I know this sounds dumb, but diesel electric Tesla, right? Mm-hmm. You run the diesel in there to charge the batteries, and you never have to worry about crap, and it runs at optimal RPM all the time to keep the batteries charged and to get the most power out of the engine without over revving it. And then it'll get 155 miles to the gallon and be able to not break down on the side of the road when it runs out of electric juice.
Right.
It would be awesome. It would be kind of cool because I bet you nobody's done that one yet. And you can get yourself a small little like Chinesium 3-cylinder diesel and that they use on like small little boats and put it right in the trunk area of the Tesla.
Prowler is a rear drive, but yeah, 3.5 V6. Yeah, I thought the Prowler was a front engine. Yeah, it's
a rear engine. It's rear engine, rear drive. They take the entire front drivetrain assembly from the Intrepid and then just move it to the rear. Yeah. Then the motor's in there the wrong way, and there's everything wrong about a Prowler.
I didn't know that. I really thought the ones I saw, I thought the engine was literally in the front.
No, it's in the rear.
Wow. I didn't know that.
That's why it has that big, ugly looking trunk on it. But it would look very perfect for a gasser, to be honest with you, because you put some big, tall, wide slicks on it, and it would be almost proportional in the rear.
How much would porting do on a stock Slant 6 with a BBD? Okay, don't do any really porting on the Slant 6. Basically, what I do is I just back cut the valves to get rid of that little hump in there, and then just clean up the port.
A lot of these guys are saying that that thing is front engine.
Yeah, I thought it was a front. I saw one. It's a front engine, and it literally was up front. Because I remember one guy put a Hemi in one, and it was sticking out, and he hooked it up to the valve to the same drivetrain, and he blew it up. So,
they're saying that the motor is longitudinal and probably considered front mid-engine.
Yeah, because it's way back behind the wheels.
Dude. They put a 4.7 in the later ones with broken exhaust manifolds from the factory.
Yeah. But Jonathan, on this thing here, just back cut the valves, and all you do is clean up the pocket port on this, and don't just run the stock valves. And I think the stock on these is 144 CFM on the intake, I believe. I'm just going off the top of my head. And I got up to like 168. Now, there's people who put like tiny valves, valve stems in this, big valves, and they get like 170 something. And you're never going to see that on a stock-ish Slant 6. Just back cut the valves, clean up the pocket on them, and you gain quite a bit from that. And it makes a world of difference.
Oh, hey, we're just about done with the show. We have a minute left.
Sure.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
What if 300 camshaft? Is that thing almost done yet?
Yes. No, it's. I think it's almost ready to go.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I finally I don't know, get my head out of my butt, my life settles down some, I got to jump on this thing because I have dumped every project in my garage. There's like 2 left now.
Keep that one.
Well, no, I'm going to keep that one. We're going to test this, dude. I'm going to find a place to test it and dyno test it, and we're going to compare them back to back.
Yeah, because I put a lot of time into that thing, man. So,
I have 5 sets of heads to swap on this 300 block,
that's awesome.
and then compare it to 350 Buick. So I got later Rover heads. I got 1964 aluminum Buick 300 heads. I got the cast iron Wildcat 355 small chamber heads. I got the 67 heads, and then I got the Buick 350 69 complete change in valve arrangement and the whole 9 yards heads.
So are we going to do this like Engine Master style, where we're going to just leave it on there and just change heads?
Okay, I'll tell you we're out of time, but I'll tell you something, all right?
Okay.
There is a machine shop here that they just got this big ticket deal to rebuild all these Power Stroke diesels and Cummins diesel engines, right? They had a full-blown machine shop where they were building, engine stuff, but there wasn't enough coming in the door. So they had a dyno, and they shut it down. And I asked the dude about leasing it for a month, right? And we could literally get enough Buick Old Pontiac guys, because it's impossible to find a dyno for Buick Olds and Pontiac guys. We just say, hey, calling all Buick Olds and Pontiac guys, $100, bring your engine, put it on the stand, and run it, right? Mm-hmm. I'll bet you have a line out the door. And he told me $4,000 for a month would be the number, right? Well, if you think about it, that's not bad, because that's 30 days. If you could do 4 engines a day, right? That's 120 engines. Everybody throws in $100. What are you looking at?
Yeah.
That's a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah, it's paid for, right? You make a little cash.
Yeah.
Be awesome.
But
all right, guys. Well, we're at 2 hours already. It's already 9 o'clock, and want to thank Mr. Dallas Brown coming back again. It's good to have you back, and I want to thank John, the Mr. No Name National Bringer, for filling in up until then. So thanks again. And is there anything else you wanted to plug? Last little bits. Anything you want to say?
No. Thanks for welcoming me back, and thanks for all the support when I was going out of my mind crying with my face on my pillow.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And once again, I did see that a few questions came through. I've been a little busy lately. I've got the mother-in-law in town right now visiting the kids, so I've been kind of here and there. So I promise you this weekend I'm going to get to all my messages. I promise you I will. Just got a lot going on right now. And if there's any questions, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com. Once again, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com. And we will get you up there. And I really appreciate everyone coming by. And this will be the first time I'm ever going to say this. Smash that like button, man. Come on. We want to, I've never asked that.
Like and subscribe to this channel or I will explode.
Yeah.
You ever seen Scanners?
Right. All right, guys. All right. Thanks again, man. You guys have a great day. Have a great week. We'll see you guys next week. All right. Later. Peace.